Hi, and welcome to the I T'd Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 59. What can farts teach us about non-repudiation? So, in creating these episodes, there's a lot of thought and planning that goes into the subject matter, and this is one of those things that when I came up with this episode, I really tried to resist just letting it out immediately. I really, really wanted to keep it in as long as I could, but now I've decided it's about time to let it rip. So, for non-repudiation, what that is, if you're not aware, non-repudiation is a concept of security where the actions that you take must have been taken by you as the user, meaning you cannot blame somebody else for the actions that were taken under your username. This is important in a lot of legal sense because you cannot claim that the things that were done underneath your username weren't you. Therefore, if something happens with your username attached, you are liable for them. And this is drastically important for people to understand in the terms of the organizational settings and organizational responsibilities that you may have. So, one of the biggest complaints that we get about security policy is that when you walk away from your computer, it locks itself after 5 minutes. And that's a pain in the ass because I have to log in. I have to type in my password every 5 minutes. Well, the reason why that's the case is because if someone were to come up after you left your desk and started doing things under your name, that would be tied to you. You would be liable for those actions. And that is not something that I think anybody wants to trust. I mean, do you trust your coworkers enough that you would be willing to accept any action they took underneath your username? The answer should always be no. You shouldn't trust anybody to do anything under your username. That is the nature of zero trust and non-repudiation. You have to maintain this environment where if you were the one who performed the action, you are the one who gets the blame. You cannot blame this on the dog. You cannot tell somebody else. You can't just point to somebody and say, you smelt it, you dealt it. Because it's going to be whoever supplied it denied it. And shit like that. You're going to run into other situations where whoever remarked on it embarked on it. Whoever introduced it produced it. Whoever smelt it dealt it. Whoever said it spread it. Whoever said the rhyme did the crime. It's just that easy. It's not that type of environment you want to open yourself up to. And in the realm of legality and security, in the terms of lawyers, and I'm really trying to think of that word, but in the terms of lawyers and how they prosecute law in regards to computer crimes, direct logging information is not necessarily a direct piece of evidence. In criminal cases, you cannot present computer logs as a primary form of evidence. It becomes hearsay. It needs to be backed up by a professional who knows the system, who knows how the logs work and operate, who can officially commit that these logs are accurate and there's no way that these logs could have been modified to show that the user performed those actions instead of that user actually performing those actions. So there's that. But in a civil case, it doesn't matter. You can be sued for what you do on a system. And these things matter. And this is why non-repudiation is a thing. And, we just had an episode on logging where we talk about logging and aggregation and how that accumulates into how we can find different things and how certain behaviors or activities can prevent detection of malicious activity. So when you are performing actions underneath the username, it is vitally important for you to understand that because non-repudiation exists and your business should have a policy that states anything done underneath your username you are liable for as the owner of the account. This means you have to be very direct and discreet about what you do on your system. You cannot just do whatever you want. You cannot allow other people to do things on your behalf. And you definitely cannot just arbitrarily allow other people into your account. This is a problem for a lot of organizations because of the way their workflow works. And so this is one of those things that we run into a lot in compliance, because most compliance frameworks, I would say 99% of compliance frameworks, dictate that in order for a user to be compliant to all of the guidelines, every user must have their own user account, every user must have their own password, every user must be unique. And the reason for this is non-repudiation. It is so somebody can't claim they weren't able, or they weren't the ones who performed an action underneath their account. What we find in specifically like the medical field is we find a lot of group accounts for specific types of activity. It's most specifically in operating rooms where you don't know what team is going to be in an operating room, and you don't necessarily want anybody who's operating on a human being to touch a mouse or keyboard. You want to have some sort of access that everybody in that OR can share, but that defeats the purpose of non-repudiation. So how do we go around that? How do we get around that kind of activity? Well, there are several ways that we can make that workflow work. Things like alternative methods of login. Instead of a person being logged in using username and password, they log in using biometrics or a passkey or prox card. CAC is used a lot in the military for this type of authentication detail. So this is something that can definitely be worked around. But again, it establishes that control of access, making sure that the only things that are done by that person are done by that person. They're not performed by another individual. They're not enacted by the system. And so non-repudiation gets into the realm of ensuring that everybody has the exact access they need, and they are doing exactly what they want, and no more. They don't get to just arbitrarily do things. They don't get to arbitrarily decide, make decisions, or change policy or procedure. And again, this is important for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that you should want to follow this is because you don't want to get blamed for somebody else doing something. You want to make sure that you are free from fault. So that's why those lockouts occur. That's why the policies occur, that if you leave your desk, you must lock your computer, so on and so forth, that you don't share your password, you don't give your account access to anybody else. These are the reasons why they exist, so that somebody can't come up behind you and just perform actions based on you and then leave a foul smell in the room. And the only person who should have been in there was you. And so it must have been you. So how do we go about following non-repudiation without becoming so ingrained in policy and procedure? And the answer is you don't, really, honestly. You must follow policy and procedure. You have to have an acceptable use policy attached to your systems that basically says that there can't be any free-floating activity out there. You can't just waft people around into different accounts. So, everybody has to have that assigned account. Everybody must have their accounts created. On top of that, you also have to have policies about when people start and when people are terminated. If there's a separation of an individual, their access must be severed immediately, so that no action can be taken upon by anybody else and it be that person, or that person taking action and claim that they didn't have access because they were fired immediately. That's where you get into trouble if you don't sever the relationship immediately. If you don't cut it off, pinch it off immediately, you can run into circumstances where those individuals, there's a question there, and if anything questionable happens, it's a whole new thing that opens everybody up to a huge amount of risk. On top of that, it's a really direct point that I make to all of my coworkers and employees and partners, that you do not share your password. And if somebody shares your password with you, you have to force them to change it. You do not want to know anybody else's password. You don't even want a question of that. I don't care if the person's password is complex or complicated or anything like that. It is 0. You do not want it. I will always remember Sylvester. Sylvester 19 is this one woman's password that she shared with me 6 times when I told her not to. And then when I told her to change it, she just incremented up the password by a number. So it was Sylvester 16 at first, then 17, then 18, then 19, and then finally 20, until I was like, okay, you got to choose an entirely different cat to do this. I don't give a shit. Top Cat, whoever, Heathcliff, I don't care. It doesn't matter. But that's where that stinky cheese comes from. And you run into circumstances where individuals have an ability to say, this wasn't me. I give my password out. It must have been the IT guy. And when you as an IT person are given that kind of leading with that kind of capability, you have to be like, no, that absolutely wasn't me. We changed her password, and here are the logs that prove that. So becoming free and clear and scentless in this type of environment is important. Again, one of the things that you need to make sure of is that if you are performing actions on behalf of a user, which sometimes we end up having to do as IT folk, if you are asked to perform tasks as a user, such as, hey, you need to log in as this user to verify that this problem exists, then you change their password to a password you know. Then when you are done with that account, you change the password to another password that you don't know and force that user to change it. So that way there is no overlap of access. There is no knowledge shared between parties, and the non-repudiation remains intact. Because again, if there is ever a question, it becomes a problem, and you do not want to get the blame because you did the game. So through all of this non-repudiation and making sure that you don't have the activity and that users are operating within themselves, what are other things that can impact this? Well, that's in configuration of things like services or service accounts and things like that. One of the things that you don't really fully understand when you're not necessarily in IT is how many things are set up as service accounts. And I'm gonna let you guys peek behind the curtain here a little bit, open the bathroom door, give it a courtesy flash to show you that absolutely everything that is automated behind the scenes, the internet, the gaming consoles, your car, fucking the airplanes that fly from here to there and everywhere, everything has a service account associated with making sure everything happens on an automated basis. Whether it's intentional or not, it's a service account that's running those automations. Now, it might not be set up as a service account, and here's where the problem lies, is when people become lazy and they do not set up the service accounts appropriately, and they just leave a little floater in there that is doing nothing but creating havoc for non-repudiation purposes. Most commonly, what we see inside of IT when we adopt a new client or come into a new organization is the previous IT person set up a bunch of these service accounts as administrator, or they set administrator as a service account. And that is a problem, because all you need to do is get that one service or that one account, and it compromises everything. And there's no non-repudiation. There's no way you can cycle and trace and identify any of the gas clouds that are now operating around inside of your environment. It's all just shit. That's what it is. It's just complete and utter poop. And you cannot track that information. So it becomes a lot harder to do things like identify the source of a malicious attack or the source of a threat, or even identify when a threat is when there is an attack within your environment. It's really hard to identify that stuff if you don't set this up properly. And so when you're setting up for service accounts or automations or things like that, always use accounts that can be identified readily. And I know I kind of attacked this early on in one of the earlier episodes, where we talk about making sure that your servers are named appropriately. But this is also true of service accounts. You want to make sure that your service accounts, your automation accounts, are named uniquely so that you can identify what they're doing. And you want each service to have a separate service account, so you don't share one account across many devices or across many services. You have one service that does one thing, so that when that one thing starts happening, you can identify it very quickly and very readily. A great example of this is something like a vulnerability scanner. Vulnerability scanners typically get a single service account associated with the vulnerability scanner. And so when you start seeing weird shit happening that has that account attached to it, you're like, oh, okay, I know what this is. This is my service account. This is my vulnerability scanner doing weird shit. The thing it's supposed to do, because it's supposed to be detecting the crap and the holes in my system where shit will fall through. And so you need that kind of separation. You need to be able to quickly identify that. Otherwise, if you just name him Jerry, well, what the fuck is Jerry doing? Man, I got to spend the next 3 hours identifying all the things that Jerry did when, it was really just the service account because I didn't name this appropriately. So that's one way that we can attack this and make sure that we're not having to blame or even have the capability to blame another person or another entity or another account or anything else for the activities that are performed underneath a specific user account. Another way that we combat this is called privileged access management. And I know I've talked about this in the past as well. Privileged access management, where we ensure that single-use passwords are associated with privileged accounts, are in play. So that way we know that the one time this was used was this one time, and we have a trail that identifies who used it and when. So that way, if there is ever a question, we can go back to an individual and be like, no, you use this account, and this is how we know that these are the breadcrumbs that lead us to you, because this information all exists because you laid it out there like it was nothing. So, is there anything else that a non-repudiation that non-repudiation entails that we can identify? Well, this is what multi-factor authentication is for as well. So that's another big complaint we get inside of IT is, I have to MFA into everything. Why do I have to MFA? I have 16 MFAs. Why do I have to MFA? Well, let me tell you what, motherfucker. I have 1,328 MFA tokens inside of my Google Authenticator right fucking now. So don't bitch at me about having 16, first off. Second off, you should be doing MFA because, again, you do not want somebody's activity underneath your account to be blamed on you. What if someone were to get into your account and steal $500,000 underneath your name and you become liable for that? What happens then? How bad will you feel? Now, you may not be directly liable for it. It may not be something that you end up having to pay yourself, but it injures somebody, it harms somebody else, and you should feel at least somewhat responsible for it coming from your account. That is how this is supposed to work. So, all that being said, everything that we've gone over, from non-repudiation being key in reasons for account lockouts, for MFA, for individuals' accounts, for service accounts, for unique identifiers. All of this is to say that if you do the crime, then you must do the time. And if somebody is doing things on your behalf, well, I'm sorry, but whoever rebut it, cut it. Now, this is a really professional podcast, and, obviously I care deeply about presenting a good image. So I've done a really good job of resisting the obvious things. I'm just fucking kidding with you guys. It's the toot, it's the poot, it's the wind biscuit, a butt trumpet, gas blast, backdoor breeze, stink puff, cheek squeak, air biscuit, thunder pants, booty burp, the old tush tootle, bum buzz, rectal rhapsody, crop duster, booty bomb, wind surprise, silent but deadly, rump roar, cushion creeper, tush toot, bean blaster, barking spider, rear roar, tailwind, gassy giggle, butt mutter, undercover puff, one cheek squeak, derriere ditty, flatulence fiesta, pop tart, booty snort, exit air, bum fog, fluff, gas grenade, tush turbulence, ankle assassin, braff, bottom burp, thunderclap, air release, backdraft, puff pastry, wind whistler, undercover toot, fanny flutter, and my personal favorite, call of the wind. Well, I'm all out of gas, guys. I hope you have a great day.